Let's start with this. We came out of Rwanda asking ourselves how it was possible that the world was inert in the face of a hideous genocide. It is my contention that years from now, historians will ask how it was possible that the world allowed AIDS to throttle and eviscerate a continent, while we toyed with the game of reform.
That quote, it's just incredibly powerful, isn't it? That's from diplomat Stephen Lewis, and it really cuts to the heart of what we're talking about today. In a world that's just full of problems, why is it that some crises get all the attention in global action, while others are met with total silence?
So let's really get into it. The big question we're tackling here is a huge one. How much should any one country get involved in what's happening outside its own borders? I mean, this is a debate that shapes everything from foreign policy to trade and even decisions about war and peace.
Now, to even start answering that, you have to realize that internationalism isn't just one single idea. The political scientist Fred Halliday argued there are really three different competing ways that nations see their role in the world. And understanding these visions is absolutely key to figuring out why countries do what they do on the global stage.
First up, we've got hegemonic internationalism. Sounds complicated, right? But it's actually a pretty simple idea. It's the belief that the world is connected, sure, but it's not equal. There's always one dominant nation at the top, kind of like the captain of the team, influencing or straight up dominating the others.
And if you want a classic example, look no further than this. At its peak, the British Empire controlled a massive chunk of the globe, about a quarter of the world's population. This is hegemony in its most obvious form, one power literally drawing the lines on the map.
But here's the thing. Hegemony isn't just about armies and colonies anymore. This cartoon captures that perfectly. Today, it can be about culture. The idea here is that one nation's brands, its movies, its music, can become so dominant that they almost feel like an invading force, shaping how people all over the world live and think. Okay, so now let's flip that idea completely on its head. Let's talk about revolutionary internationalism. This vision isn't about leading the current world order, it's about tearing it down and starting over. The core belief is that local problems are tied to global power structures. So if you want real change, you need to team up internationally to challenge the whole system. And you can't talk about this without talking about the Cuban Revolution. I mean, this was a perfect example. This wasn't just about changing the government on one small island. No, it was an attempt to create a whole new socialist path and inspire other countries to do the same, building a brand new alliance to push back against the dominant powers. All right, so if hegemonic internationalism is about leading the system and revolutionary internationalism is about overthrowing it, what's the third way? Well, that would be liberal internationalism. This is the idea that's behind big organizations like the United Nations. It's this really optimistic belief that by working together, by cooperating, nations can solve huge problems and achieve big goals like peace and prosperity for everyone. You know, the Canadian diplomat Lester B. Pearson just nailed this idea right after World War II. He basically said, look, we're all in this together now. What happens in one part of the world is going to affect everyone else. And that doesn't just create consequences, it creates obligations, a responsibility we have to each other. Okay, so we've got these three different ways of seeing the world. But what actually makes a country get off the sidelines and do something? What pushes them to get involved on the world stage? Well, let's dig into the motivations.
It's always complicated, of course, but it often comes down to one of these four things. A simple moral duty to help others, the need to protect their own citizens, the desire for a stable economy, or the pursuit of their own national interests. And you can see how these might feed into those different visions, right? A focus on national security might lead to hegemonic action, while a strong sense of humanitarian duty might push a country towards a more cooperative, liberal approach. Now, when we talk about getting involved for peace, we have to get this straight, because these two words get mixed up all the time. Peacekeeping is when the fighting has already stopped. You go in with everyone's permission to help make sure the peace holds. But peacemaking, that's totally different. That's when you step into an active conflict to try and stop the fighting, using things like mediation and diplomacy. Much trickier. But you know, even with the best intentions, getting involved is, well, it's messy. And this cartoon, wow, it's a brutal criticism of the response to the genocide in Darfur. It shows the UN basically tangled up in red tape while a tragedy unfolds. It's a powerful reminder of the huge gap between wanting to help and actually being able to make a difference. And of course, we can't forget one of the biggest drivers of all, money. Economic stability is a huge motivator. Supporters of big free trade deals like NAFTA
We'll point to them and say, see, this is a success for everyone. This quote from a White House official calls it a clear win-win. But was it really a win-win for everyone? Well, that's where the debate gets heated. Because on the flip side, you have critics like the Canadian politician Peter Julian, who argue that those deals made things worse for regular people, that they led to growing inequality while the poor and middle class got left behind. So you see these two totally opposite views on the exact same thing. And that brings us to a fundamental question. If there are so many good reasons to get involved in the world, why do countries so often just not? Well, the answer, almost every single time, is a conflict of interests.
Let's take a real-world example that makes this crystal clear. Deforestation in the Amazon rainforest. From a global perspective, this image is a catastrophe. We see the destruction of what's often called the lungs of the planet. It's absolutely devastating.
But now, I want you to completely change your point of view. Imagine you're a local farmer there. You might say something like this. You criticize us for clearing this land, but we're just trying to feed our families. We want a better life. We just want to make a living. Is that so bad?
And so this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Whose responsibility is the rainforest? Is it Brazil's, a sovereign nation that needs to worry about the well-being of its own people? Or is it the world's responsibility, since we all depend on it to survive? How you answer that changes everything.
That whole Amazon dilemma, it really brings everything we've talked about into sharp focus. And it leads us to one final fundamental question.
Because when you boil it all down, when you strip away all the politics and the economics, nearly every single one of these debates comes down to this one epic conflict. On one side, you have national sovereignty, the idea that every country has the right to run itself without anyone else interfering. And on the other, you have universal human rights, the belief that some values are so important, some rights so fundamental that they apply to everyone, everywhere, no matter what.
And so, that's what I want to leave you with. In a world that feels like it's getting smaller and more connected every single day, the line between what's a domestic issue and what's a foreign issue is getting blurrier and blurrier. So the question for all of us is, where exactly does our problem end and their problem begin?